Welcome to Spiritually United Paradox, literally language of the heart speaker gathering. All our speakers are shared on our WhatsApp audio groups and our speaker channels. The links will be dropped in the chat. If you're listening to this recording and need help, we have a way how that works. Please reach out and send us an email at
dimensiondoor164@gmail.com.
and the crew will reach out and get back to you. First up, we'll read a section of the Big Book. We go week to week from the Doctor's Opinion to page 1 to 164. We've invited RJM from Utah to share a message of depth and weight from the heart and the section of the Big Book. Over to you, brother.
What's up, guys? My name's RJ. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I would just like to say, first and foremost, this is one of the coolest meetings I've ever been a part of. Like the theme song in the front, all of you guys talking and the camaraderie. This is pretty cool. I'm super nervous, but I'm super excited to be here too. Um, so yeah, I guess my understanding is I'm going to read these three paragraphs and I'm going to try to share my experience, strength, and hope, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, and try to relate these three paragraphs to my life and my struggle and my recovery. So I guess I hope today that I can share with you guys that I that I am fit with the tools of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous of CA, and I'll be able to share my experience with you guys, and you guys will understand that I'm able to speak from the heart, I guess. Okay. So with that, I'll go ahead and I'll start. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort with which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's little hope of his recovery. On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself able to control his desire for alcohol, and the only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple steps or simple rules. Sorry. So, like I said, my name's RJ, and I'm an addict. This is, I guess I got lucky because these three paragraphs, in my opinion, describe how it was or what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. This is kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end of my drinking and drugging, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share what it was like, and then I'm going to include the beginning, the middle, and this end paragraph in my story. So why do we drink? Obviously, I drink because I like the way it makes me feel. That's an obvious thing, right? And I remember being a kid, like I had like these morals and these statutes that I would never ever inflict. My father told me, "Hey, this is how we act accordingly." And this is the kind of man I wanted to be, and the kind of man I became, right? Or wanted to become. So as a young kid, like I didn't grow up in with a bunch of abuse in my home or anything like that. I never grew up in like a poor environment. I was never abused. I never had any wants or needs really. I had a really great father who made sure that I had anything I could possibly need. My dad is my best friend and he's my hero to this day. I love him very much. And if I could ever become half the man my father has become, then I know that I've arrived. Like this is how I feel about my father. So I can't sit here and pretend like I'm a victim of my circumstances. I can't say, hey, if you'd been where I've been or you grew up where I grew up, then you would have done what I've done too to try to escape. That was never my issue. Um, as a matter of fact, my dad was here yesterday. And I'm just really grateful for the relationship I have with my dad today. I have two brothers and a sister. My sister just got out of prison. She was in Texas and she got arrested for manufacturing narcotics. So she went to prison. She's got out and she's worked the steps since then, and she's sober and she's getting her children back in her life. So I can see these people that are in my life, and it's happening for them too. I have two older brothers. They're not in the program. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I can't say if they're alcoholic or not, but my father's not alcoholic. My grandparents aren't alcoholic. From everything I can see, me and my sister are just kind of black sheeps. So at an early age, though, it was weird because I always felt a little bit incomplete. I don't know if anybody's ever else felt incomplete. I feel like God made this beautiful person and then just kind of pulled him out of the oven a little soon, and I'm just missing something. Like I didn't cook long enough, or he didn't put enough salt in that, right? So I've always felt like I was missing something. And so that kind of brings us to like why we drink. We drink essentially because we like the effects produced by alcohol, right? So I remember the first time my friend walked down the stairs and he was carrying some cheap vodka and he had a bottle of pills of Ambien sleeping pills that he had stole from his mother's cabinet, right? And I just remember thinking, going back to like my dad, like being like, RJ, we don't drink, we don't do drugs, right? Like these sort of things. But like I said, I always felt incomplete. And I always had this real sense of fear that you would judge me and you wouldn't accept me or love me for who I really was. And I remember feeling that from a really young age. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is not what we do. Like, this is not what you want to do, RJ. And I thought to myself, well, what are they going to think of me if I don't join them? You know, and the fear of rejection was just absolutely trumped anything I thought that I knew about my moral compass. So I immediately started drinking with my friends. And what happened is I loved uh the effects that were produced, right? I no longer had that fear of rejection. I no longer had these inadequacies. I was a part of, and I never felt like a part of before in my entire life. Like I never felt like I had a lot of purpose. So this kind of what I like to call it now is kind of like this fraudulent spiritual experience has just occurred for me, but it felt very real at the time. So like I was lit up. I was 7 feet tall. I was bulletproof. I was a part of a group, and everybody loved me, and I loved everybody. And so essentially, this is what it's talking about in that first paragraph I just spoke about. It says the sensation is so elusive that they admit it is injurious, and they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. And now this is just starting to work into our entire the entire heavy drinking of my career, But I'll slow down a little bit. So that was about at the age of 14. And I just started chasing that elusive feeling throughout the rest of my childhood. Things that mattered to me no longer became important. I was a huge athlete, football, basketball, baseball. I wrestled. I even ski raced. My dad's a ski instructor at Deer Valley, where the Olympics came in 2002. So like I ski raced, I did all these things and then none of these things mattered anymore, right? All I wanted to do was get loaded and I wanted to stay loaded because I felt complete when I did that, right? I have this external solution to this internal problem and it has just solved this internal problem temporarily that I thought, So I just chased it everywhere I could. And gosh, it's so funny thinking about this. I just celebrated my 4 years of sobriety a couple of days ago on the 12th of November, and I just picked up a chip with my friend, and we were talking about where we had come from and like what we had done up until this point. And sometimes it kind of feels like I'm talking in the third person or I'm talking to about somebody else's life, that I just watched a movie of. And so at the age of 18, I was charged with my first felony in Utah, and what ended up happening was I ended up going to a party and we were drunk and we were drugging and I ended up beating up these kids and taking all of their belongings, and I was charged with aggravated assault and aggravated robbery. And at the age of 19, I went to the Utah State Penitentiary for my first time, and it was really weird because I could see this is what it's talking about too. I see other people drinking with immunity and having fun and going to raves and drugging and then going home that night. And I was never able to do that. I remember the first time I was introduced to drugs, it was ecstasy at a rave, and everybody went home after the rave. And I went to an after party and stayed there for 3 straight days, right? Like I'm not the same as any of them, like I know that now, but looking back at it, I thought I was just having fun. So anyway, at the age of 19, I went to the Utah State Penitentiary for my first time. And I would never admitted this 4 years ago, but today I can admit to you that I was just absolutely terrified and I was full of fear. And that fear really drove me through the next 4.5 years that I was incarcerated. I just quickly became anything I thought you wanted me to be. And I had my stage characters that I always have, that every alcoholic and drug addict has. I have this facade that I put on that I want you to see. But inside, I just know that's not who I really am. And and it's funny because when you're at home, you could put on these stage characters and you could go out to the club or you could go out to a friend's house and then you could put on this mask of who you want them to see, right? And then you can come home and you can be yourself. In prison, you can't do that. You know, you keep that character and you keep that facade on 24/7. Maybe that's a way to protect yourself. I'm not sure. I'm not a therapist, you know, but that's what I did. And so I honestly became this character that I put on my face and what it was in prison, you know, you can imagine the people that do well in prison are the tough guys, gang members, drug dealers, hustlers. Like these are the kind of guys that in prison are, I guess, I don't know, cool, right? Like I grew up in this era anyway. Like I grew up idolizing gangsters. I grew up idolizing athletes. I grew up idolizing these kind of tough fighters, you know. So that's who I tried to become. And I really did, honestly. And over the next 4.5 years, I really experienced I did a lot of growing up in prison, which is probably not the place that a 19-year-old kid that doesn't know who the hell he is should probably grow up, right? I got out of prison for the first time and I immediately went to drugs. For me, it was coke, it was meth, and it was a little bit of heroin, but it absolutely solved my drinking problem. So thanks, meth, for that, right? After I started doing drugs, it was like there was no more time for drinking, right? And it absolutely consumed me. I went from smoking meth to try to hook up with girls and have fun with my friends to intravenously slamming it and it just took me to the absolute depths of despair extremely quickly, you know. And I remember thinking to myself, like I was out of prison for 6 weeks, and I remember thinking to myself, if I could just make it till Friday, I could go to sleep, I could wake up on Monday, and I could get to work. And then Sunday would come and I haven't slept, and then Monday would come and the only thing that made sense to me is, oh, I got to get higher. I won't be able to stay up at work, and if I can't go to work, I have this cunning and baffling, powerful voice in my head, and it sounds exactly like me, and I listen to it, right? And it's not me; it's my alcoholism that's worried, my alcoholism that's manipulating me, and I have a powerlessness inside of me that I can't control anymore, you know. And this is where I really talked about in that second paragraph, you know, after they have succumbed to the desire again, told myself I wouldn't do it, and here I am getting loaded again. As so many do, the phenomenon of craving develops, and they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is exactly what it would do. Like I would say, I'm not going to do this. I would succumb to it, and then the phenomenon of craving would kick in. And I love the way Bob D explains the phenomenon of craving better than anything I've ever heard. He talks about the phenomenon of craving as something like the way you breathe. You know, everybody craves breath, right? But you don't realize you crave it until somebody takes it away from you. So he describes the phenomenon of craving much like somebody coming and putting a bag over your head, you know, and within moments, you're going to realize how badly you crave that breath and you will do absolutely anything to breathe again, right? This is the phenomenon of craving. This is the way I feel when I put a substance into my body. Nothing and anything will stop me from trying to feel that way again, you know, and this is essentially what it would do. I would tell myself I'm not doing this, right? I would succumb to the powerlessness, right? I would succumb to the desire again, and then that phenomenon of craving would kick in. And now I'm off to the races, and I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know when I'm going to come back. All I know is that I'm going to leave a lot of wreckage and a lot of hurt people in my path during this time, you know? So I was out of prison for 6 weeks, and this is the first time thinking back I can really talk about the cycle of unmanageability, the phenomenon of craving, and the feelings that I had during that time. Because every single time I would come out of those, I would feel so bad, and I would want to apologize and just tell the world how sorry I truly am. Because now I can see this moral line that my father has instilled in me that I had passed during this spree, right? And I go to bed and come back, and there I can see that line. It's faded, but I can see it, and I have so much remorse and so much guilt and shame for the things I do on these sprees, you know? So I made it 6 weeks and out of prison that first time, and I caught charges in 6 different counties in the state of Utah, and I went back to prison again. And this time I was only sentenced to 18 more months. And about 60 to 90 days before I was supposed to go home, the gang I was a part of in prison fought the cops, and I was a part of that. And so they removed my release date and they held me in there for a 2.5 year rehearing. So I went and sat in this supermax prison for the next 3.5 years. So I ended up doing about 5 years that time too. And I got out of prison and I was 30 years old in 2018. And it happens like that, you know. Last thing I remember was playing football with my friends. My dad taking me to ski races, drinking a beer and running around with my friends, right? And now I'm 30 years old. I've never had a job. I've never had any real relationship. I've never had any responsibilities. My family's kind of come to terms with the fact that RJ, this is who RJ is now, and I'm telling you guys, it's just like that. That's how it happened for me. And next thing I know, I wake up and I'm 30 years old. And the funniest thing happened though in prison. I don't regret any of this, you guys. I want you to know that, like, all of these things that I've done and all of these people and along the way, like, they've really created a person that I'm very comfortable with today. Somebody that I could be honest with you guys about, and who I love looking in the mirror today is I love myself, and all these things kind of shaped who I am. So it was the funniest thing though. Like, I was sitting in prison and I called my sister, and my sister's friend answered the phone, and she was drunk and she was kind of talking shit. Like, she's like, "Oh, how's Bubba treating you in prison?" and talking shit to me on the phone. And I ended up marrying her. I ended up marrying that girl. And she's sitting on the couch right now, laughing at me, holding my brand new baby that's 3 days old that we brought into the world on Saturday the 15th. And so it was super funny. And she was really drunk. And I don't know if this is for sure how it went, but my sister and her told me, if I remember correctly, don't correct me if I'm wrong, babe, because this is my story. If I lie a little bit to make it sound better, guys, just know it sounds really good, right? Um, she told me that she wanted to get sober for me, so when I came home, I wouldn't be tempted to drink and drug when I got out. And so when I was in prison, she went to AA and she got sober for me, and she got us a house to move into, and she did all these things. And so when I got out of prison on March 27th, 2018, I moved right in with her and immediately did what you're supposed to do, and I knocked her right up, got her right pregnant. Exactly what you're supposed to do when you get out of prison. And it was great, you guys. I had made these promises to her that I made before, but I really meant them. I made these promises to my father, especially I made them to my grandparents, like, "Hey, please don't give up on me. I'm gonna do right by you guys, and I'm gonna change my life. And I promised her the same thing. I told her I was gonna get out and I was gonna get a job. I was gonna take care of her and our son, and I was gonna do all of these things. And that first about 6 months, you guys, I promise you I did. Um, there's something that could be said about motivation and drive that can really help somebody, even an alcoholic that doesn't know he's an alcoholic, right? Even a drug addict that doesn't yet know what a drug addict really is. And so I got out of prison and I immediately started going to work. And I think I was making $12 an hour digging ditches on the side of a road for installing cable wire, right? And within what, 6 months, I had my Class A CDL. I had my tanker endorsement, so I could drive big semi trucks. I was foreman of that construction crew, and I was making $23 an hour now. And I was taking care of her. I was paying all of the bills, and I really was living up to what I had promised when I was in prison. The problem is this I could see now, but I didn't know then. Is the problem is that I'm a drug addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a real alcoholic, you guys. And the big book tells me that's a progressive illness, which gets worse, never better, right? So even though I'm out here doing push-ups in the real world, what's really going on in the background is my alcoholism is doing push-ups too. And so little did I know that a couple of beers would take me out. And that's how it was for me. I went to a football game with my dad. And this is where the phenomenon of craving comes in again. Is I had a couple of beers with my dad at a University of Utah football game, and the entire game I couldn't think of anything except putting a needle in my arm. You know, How that phenomenon of craving is just kicked in, and now I know that now I don't know where I'm going to end up. You know, so um, I can't tell you anything about that game, and that's my favorite sport and my favorite football team. I watched a rerun of an old game this morning. That's how I feel about this team, right? And I couldn't tell you anything about that game other than all I wanted to do was get high and my pregnant wife was at home waiting for me to get home. And I I got out of my dad's car and I pretended to walk in my house, and I waited around the back until my dad left, and I went and got in my truck, and I drove to a place in Salt Lake where I knew they sold drugs. And I did shot after shot of meth until I couldn't move anymore and I couldn't answer the phone for my wife when she would call me. I don't know if I couldn't answer the phone because I was too high. I think I couldn't answer the phone because I was paralyzed by shame and guilt of how I felt about myself at that time. And when I get into those kind of sprees, I can't have anybody around me that loves me. You know, I don't want to be by myself. Kind of like the big book describes, in the real alcoholic, a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Clyde, right? I'm really night and day difference. Like even though I might look the same, you wouldn't recognize me because my aura is just completely dark once I go to that place. And it even talks about like that I will become disgustingly and even dangerously antisocial, right? This really describes me to a T when it's describing the real alcoholic. You can go down that entire thing and it's like, yep, check that off. Get tight at the exact wrong moments. Yep, check that off. And I check all the boxes off for the real alcoholic. And maybe it's right, maybe I was a moderate drinker and then a hard drinker, and then at some stage I became a real alcoholic. I'm not sure what that looks like for me, because the moment I took that first drink and had that fraudulent spiritual experience, I think that was it for me, um it was just yeah, it was 3 days. I got high on Friday, and Sunday I came home in manipulation mode because that's the kind of drug addict I am. I'm not worried about how you feel. I'm worried about how I look, right? Am I going to look weak? Am I going to look dumb? I can't have that. So I remember coming home and like pretending to cry and telling her like, "Oh, please, please, please don't tell anybody. I'm so embarrassed. I can handle this on my own, you know." But realistically, I just didn't want her to tell anybody because I didn't want anybody to be think I was less than, you know. That's unmanageability. I didn't not go home or answer my pregnant girlfriend's call at the time because of lack of love. I did this because of powerlessness, right? Um, that is our dilemma. We lack power, right? And so it's not lack of love, it's lack of power that's my problem. And this I'm grateful to know today. So the next couple of years of my life, you guys, was probably the worst I've ever been. People be like, "Well, I would rather die than go to prison." In my drug addiction, I beg to go back to prison. I do really well in prison. All my friends are there. People think I'm cool. Like I do well in prison, you guys. Where I don't do well is an internal prison that I can't stand myself and I think of killing myself every day. That's where I can't be there, right? And so during this addiction, I remember having fights with my wife, begging her to leave me, right? Begging for prison to come take me back, things like that, and just creating wreckage the whole way, victimizing everybody in my life. If I need you guys to understand something today, it's the kind of drug addict I am is one of reckless abandon. I'm the tornado it talks about in the big book. And then when I wake up from my nap, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? The storm's over. Why are you mad? Right? This is the kind of drug addict I am. And I am a slimy, sleazy drug addict. I rob, I manipulate, I steal from everybody that is around me. And I use everybody in my life. I don't care if you're my father, my grandmother, my wife. It doesn't matter. It's not personal. It's business for me. And I won't stop until I get what I need. And what I need to do is I need to feel complete. And how I do that is with drugs and alcohol. That's where I'm at with it. Right. So the next couple of years were really wild for me. Some of the most important people in my life, like my grandmother and my grandfather, helped raise me when I was a baby. So my father was a single father, and my grandmother was born with dementia. And I'll tell you what, or was diagnosed with dementia. And I'll tell you, if I could cure anything in the whole world today, it wouldn't be alcoholism or addiction. It would be dementia. If I could find a cure for that, like that's I would take that, right? So she was diagnosed with dementia, and I remember we had my first son's baby shower at her house, and she just kind of wasn't there anymore. And a couple days later, she fell down the stairs and broke her back, and I was able to spend the night in the hospital with her that night. Of course, loaded. on drugs and alcohol, but I spent the night with my grandmother that night. She passed away the next morning. And so the demoralization that followed my grandmother's death should be enough for anybody to get sober, but it wasn't enough for me, right? I was supposed to speak at my grandmother's funeral. I was too high on meth to do it. My mouth was too dry. I couldn't even talk. The funeral procession, I carried her to her final resting place. I was supposed to be in a limousine because I was a pallbearer, and I couldn't drive in the limo because I was too high. So I drove myself, and I got high on the way, and I held up the entire funeral procession for 30 minutes while I was getting loaded in the car by myself, wanting to die. Right. Um, I did the exact same thing with my grandfather because like what better way to send the people away that loved you your entire life than carrying them to the final resting place high and not caring about anybody's feelings at all, right? This is the kind of guy that's talking to you right now. And I know that I'm one decision away from being right back there. That's why I try to stay contingent on my spiritual maintenance of this program. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love any CA, CMA. I go to all of them. So I just want to make that clear, you know. So in 2021, I went to treatment for the first time. Up until this point in time, I've never ever had a shot at going to a rehab facility. And it was so funny because I was such an irresponsible guy. My wife, a single mother of two at this point, pretty much, had to go get a job and she got insurance. And because she had insurance, I was able to get into a treatment center. I remember she called me and I was crying and I wanted to kill myself. And I told her I wanted help. And she called a couple treatment centers and I got into a treatment center. This was the first time I was ever introduced to recovery or Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. I got sober in AA. I worked the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and when I go to AA, I identify as an alcoholic. I also go to Crystal Meth Anonymous, and when I go to Crystal Meth Anonymous, I identify as a meth addict. When I go to CA, or NA, I introduce myself as an addict, and I simply do this because I know that I can't today, and I want to be a part of because I know that I can't, but we can. So what I do today is I know I can, so I let God and all of you help me get there, right? So excuse me if I mix some AA up with the CA, but where I got sober was in AA. And the first AA meeting I was ever introduced to was the first time I was in this treatment center. It was called Alpine Recovery Lodge, and what they did is they pulled us in, and there was a YouTube video of this dude. His name's Brandon Novak. He's all over YouTube now, and they put his story on. And for the first time in my life, I heard somebody talk with weight and depth about the exact same thing that I had. Right? I was like, he's telling my story. The length that he's willing to go to is the length I'm willing to go to. Anything and anybody, it doesn't matter, right? And I heard this man talk about the solution alcoholics to addiction and drugs and alcohol, and I knew that I had what he had, right? So I wanted to do that. And my alcoholic mind said, you need to show your wife this video, right? I was like, oh, I don't need rehab. I just need to watch this video every day, you know? So what I did was I was on this, they black you out, so you're not allowed to make a phone call for the first 7 days. And so I used that as an excuse to leave. I was like, this makes perfect sense. I show her this video, she'll feel bad for me, won't leave me, and well, everything will be perfect, you know? So this is the first time I know that God was interfering with my life right here, and I ignored it because I get out and I go jump in my car to leave the rehab, and I start driving away. I have a flat tire, and I was like, "Fuck!" And I'm like up the canyon, and everybody comes out of the rehab. And they're like, "RJ, just come back. It's a sign from God," you know. And so I get out and I go change my flat tire, and I can't get my tire off because I don't have a lug nut lock key. And so I'm like, "Oh, I'm just gonna have to do what I have to do." And I drove down the canyon with a flat tire. And instead of going home, I went straight to the block and I bought a bunch of meth and I got high for the next day and a half. And I never called my wife and I never went home. How do you go from a place of this is what I've got and this is the solution to it, and I want it more than anything, to having a needle in your arm immediately, right? The phenomenon of craving, the powerlessness, right? This is what it talks about in this reading. It cannot, I mean, nothing can describe it more, right? And then I come out of that feeling remorseful and wanting another chance. And please forgive me, it will never happen again. And I mean it, right? So this next time they told me I talked to the treatment center. I said, please let me come back. And she said, you can come back, but you can't bring your car. I said, all right. So it was funny. I had my wife meet me at the car dealership because I just signed the papers for this car, and I was hoping that the loan would go through before they found out I no longer had a job or any money, you know? So I pull up to this car dealership and it's full of crap and drugs, and I pull up and I drop my keys inside of it and I just walk away. As a matter of fact, I keep saying this every time I tell my story. I gotta call them and see if I need to make an amends to them for that car. Should probably make an amends to that car dealership for that car. But anyway, so my wife picked me up right there and drove me to this treatment center. And I ended up staying that time. I did 60 days, 45 to 60 days in the treatment center. And I did absolutely everything they could possibly tell you to do. I went into my therapy and I cried. I cried about my mommy issues because my mom wasn't around when I was a kid. I cried about losing my grandparents. I cried about being a deadbeat dad. I did family therapy with my wife. I did everything they told you to do. I was that guy in those process groups that's like, I know what you need to do. And I was giving people advice, you know? Like I was exactly what the big book described. I was the boy, the whistling, the boy in the dark, whistling in the dark because trying to keep his spirits up. The whistling boy. I don't know if you guys remember that story, but essentially this kid's in the dark and he's whistling like he's not scared, trying to keep his spirits up. And that's who I was, you know. I was like, this is what you got to do. I've never felt better. I don't even know why I ever got high in the first place, you know. And I was like, you know what? I know what it was. It was where I was living. It was Magna, Utah. That's ghetto as hell. That's why I know what to stay sober in Magna. So I was like, I got an idea. When I get out of sober living, I'm going to move my family from Magna, Utah to Spanish Fork, Utah. They don't have drugs in Spanish Fork. You know, this is going to be perfect. Everything's going to be great. And I did exactly that. I talked my wife into moving out away from her family to a faraway place where there is no drugs, you know? And the first day I went to work after I did my geological change, right? I got high again. I just picked up a 90-day chip, and I got high again. And the worst thing that could have possibly happened for me happened. My wife texted me and she said, I'm not mad. I just love you. Please come home. I don't want to hear that. I want you to tell me to fuck off, you know? I want you to tell me how big of a piece of shit I am, because that's what I keep thinking in my mind. My alcoholism doesn't tell me, hey, go get high, RJ. It doesn't say, hey, RJ, go buy a bottle of booze. My alcoholism tells me, hey, you're a piece of shit. Why are you pretending to be something you're not? This is what my alcoholism tells me. Why are you faking the funk? Go be a fucking drug addict, dog. Why are you pretending? And this is what I want people to tell me, because then I'll be right about who I think I am. But all I got was, please come home. You know, all the people I went to treatment with were like, RJ, it's okay. Let us come get you, you know? And I checked myself into a detox the second week of November of 2021. And I got out of detox before Thanksgiving, and I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I raised my hand. I said, my name's RJ. I'm a drug addict and an alcoholic, and I just want help. And my sponsor at the time raised his hand and he said, when I was new, I sat down and I shut the fuck up. And I was like, oh, this is my kind of guy, you know? I was like, I think he's talking to me. And so I did. I shut the fuck up, you know, because I understand what that means. What that means is be quiet and I'm going to come talk to you after the meeting, you know? And that's what they did. There was 3 guys in that room today, and I think one of them is here. Well, hold on, let me see. My sponsor is in this room right here. I don't know if he's still here. Anyway, but they were in that room. They were in that room, and I went and worked the first 3 steps in the parking lot of what we call the Palace. Oh, hold on, I screwed this up. And what we call the Palace, it's where I got sober. It's called the Palace, so we call it the Palace, even though it is smashed in between a tattoo parlor and a massage parlor where they do pretty iffy things, right? And that's where the Palace is at. That's where we all get sober, right? Um, okay. Anyway, so that's where I got sober, and we went out to and we did the first 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in the parking lot of the Palace that day. And what it looked like for me is it looked like we went to the ABCs, and he had me write honest, open, and willingness next to them. And essentially, Hold on, let me bring this up, please. Give me one quick second. He had me write HOW next to the ABCs. And what that meant was that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives, right? That's step one, right? And it's a two-part. So we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. And you can ask yourself these quick questions, right? I wish I was better at moving with the Zoom thing. Okay? But ask yourself these questions. Are you sober right now? Yeah, I'm sober right now. I got 2 weeks, right? He's like, how much money do you have in your bank account? What bank account? And when people ask me these things about like bank accounts and bills and rent and stuff like that, like I don't know how to answer that because I've never had a bank account. I've never had responsibilities, right? Like I don't know how to answer that. I've never had success. Like success for me looked like, did I rob somebody good enough that I can buy drugs for the next few days? Right? Because if so, that's a pretty successful day for someone like me, right? So no, I don't have a bank account. I have a Cash App card, if that counts, right? He was like, that doesn't count. So you don't have any money. I was like, no, I don't have any money. He said, how's your job? I said, what job? I don't have a job. The last job I have, I was delivering bounce houses for kids' birthday parties, right? This is the kind of job I have. How's your relationship with your wife? I said, she wants to leave me. She's scared of me and my kids are scared of me. He said, it sounds pretty goddamn unmanageable. I said, yeah, it does. He said, and you're fucking sober, right? So he said, so what that means is I admitted that I'm powerless over alcohol. Anytime that I put a substance into my body, I don't know where I'm going to wake up. I can admit that I'm powerless over alcohol and that my life is unmanageable with or without it. Because here I am, stone cold sober, and my wife doesn't want to talk to me, and I don't have a bank account, and I'm a failure in every aspect of my life. I can admit this today. That's a two-part question. I'm powerless and my life is unmanageable. He said, all right, welcome to step two. Don't overthink it. So I just knew that I was going to listen to this man, right? Step two, it came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This is the openness, right? Open-mindedness of the ABCs, right? That probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. So he asked me, how was rehab? I said, I did very well in rehab, just like I do in prison. I do very well if you're going to give me structure and you're going to give me a carrot and ask me to do things, right? I can do the laundry for the house. I can do this kind of stuff. And so he asked me, do you think your therapist liked you? I said, yeah, I thought my therapist liked me a lot. She loved me. And he said, do you think if she had a magic pill that would cure your alcoholism or your alcoholism and your addiction, do you think she would have gave you that pill? And I said, absolutely. He said, that's because no human power can relieve your alcoholism. And he said, that means that only God can and will if you seek him, right? So this is step two. Came to believe that a power greater than us can restore to sanity. So now that I know that my therapist can't relieve my alcoholism, then I know that God can. And he asked me if I believed in God. And God has never been a problem for me. I've always believed in God. Okay. I grew up in a church, in a God fearing home. My grandmother took me to church every single Sunday. I believed in God, and the idea of God I had when I was a child is still the same fundamental idea I have today for the most part. But my problem with God was I had done so much foul stuff. I didn't think God would want anything to do with somebody like me, right? I've victimized every single person in my life, my entire life, right? I've been selfish, dishonest, self-centered, and egotistical my entire life. God doesn't want to help people like that. And he told me, he said, I didn't ask you if you think God would help you. I asked you if you believed in God. And I said, yes. And he said, welcome to step three, right? Because I know that God's all powerful. And if he wanted to, he could restore me to sanity, right? Step three, when we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. And this is where my psychic change really started to happen because I honestly took this personally. Okay. He said, everywhere you go, you have a new employer. He said, the first thing you do in the morning is you check in with your employer. If you get a new job on Monday, you're going to walk in there 15 minutes early and you're going to say, what can I do for you? This is the perception you need to take on with God. And everywhere you go, he's going with you. So when you're in the car driving by yourself, listening to music, he's in the passenger seat. You better act accordingly. And so I took it on. And I remember the first time I had this psychic change, which is talking about in the last part of this book. It says, um, the second part of that chapter, it says, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. And I remember I went to the store and it was snowing, and I brought the grocery cart to my car, and I filled up my car, my groceries, and I threw the cart in the parking lot because it was cold and I didn't want to walk it back inside. And I got in my car and I went to turn around, and God, I swear he was sitting in the passenger seat, like shaking his head, like, what the fuck is that? So I got out of the car, I grabbed my cart and I took it back inside, and I started acting accordingly. Right. And I could see the psychic change, even though I was only a few weeks sober, I could see it starting to happen like the Karate Kid, like I'm waxing on and I'm waxing off. And it doesn't make sense until people start throwing punches at me, but I'm fucking defending myself now, you know? And so that was my experience with those first three steps, and that the first taste of that psychic change that I ever had, you know. We talked about step 4 earlier, and step 4 and 5 were really powerful for me. I did my step 4 and 5 minimally. I faked it. I faked the funk, you know. I told him things that I thought he wanted to hear. And the big icebergs that you were talking about, that was these huge icebergs, I wouldn't tell him what I those, because those I'm going to die with, right? Those I'm not willing to tell anybody about. Those are the worst items I have in stock. And you know, the big book talks, and there's a couple of things it says in the big book if you're having trouble staying sober that I really listen to. And one of them is if you're step 5, if you didn't share your entire story with somebody, there's very little chance that you're going to stay sober. You know, and then the other thing that stands out to me is step 12. If you don't give it away, then you're never going to be able to keep it. And so we went through my 4 step, and then afterwards he pushed the paper to the side. He said, RJ, this is good stuff, but this isn't what's keeping you sick. And that man I'd only known for about a week, he told me the worst items he had in stock, the ones that he didn't want to tell his sponsor. And then he said, RJ, there's something you're not telling me, and you're going to need to tell me today, so in order to stay sober. And I broke down and I told him the worst items, the worst things I'd ever done, the things that I felt disgusting about, that I thought he would tell me, get out of my car, I don't want anything to do with you, right? And he got out of his van. He came over to the passenger seat. He opened it up and he gave me a big hug. And he told me he loved me and accepted me and didn't think any differently of me, you know? And that iceberg, it melted. And I knew that I was going to be able to stay sober one day at a time for the rest of my life. Um, like we talked about earlier, my sponsor didn't do this with me, my first sponsor. We just did step 6 and 7 out of the book, and we read a couple of paragraphs. And I really didn't think much of step 6 and 7, you know? We moved on to step 8, 9, and 10, and 11 and 12. And 8 and 9 were really, I'm going to try to hurry up a little bit. 8 and 9 were, at first, they were really easy for me because I just called my dad and was like, hey, Dad, I'm really sorry for being a piece of shit. My dad's like, oh, you're good. I love you. You know, it's things like that. I had a lot of faceless victims and service commitments he wanted me to do for that. But I got into step 10, 11, and 12, which my sponsor Dave calls my daily disciplines, you know. And I'm going to talk about those in just a second too. But I want to go back to step 6 and 7, because for me, my recovery really has been, the farther and farther I get, the more and more will be revealed, right? And I really believe this, because when I first got sober, what I needed to do was I needed to be of service. I needed to be of service to stay sober, and that's what I did. I dove face first into service. I did a bunch of treatment centers. I go to rehabs. I'd go to meetings, and I'd share my experience, and I'd get a bunch of sponsees, and I did that every day. That's like what I did, was just service, 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 you know. In about 18 months, my emotional sobriety was, we'll call it, I was emotionally drunk. I was miserable. I thought about doing dumb stuff again. And I read this Bill Wilson talk about emotional sobriety and doing things for the right reason. And then I got into the 6 and 7 out of the 12 and 12, and started looking at the way I was camouflaging these character defects I have, and why I was doing things for the wrong reason, and all this kind of stuff. And honestly, if you're feeling that way and you have a little bit of sobriety right now, if you're feeling like depressed or kind of stagnant, I totally suggest getting into that Bill Wilson reading about his emotional sobriety, and looking at steps 6 and 7 out of the 12 and 12, because it absolutely changed my life, you know. Today I do 4 things every single day. Is I get on my knees and I pray, which looks like I check in into my employer today. God, what can I do to be of service today? Please make me of service today, right? I open my big book. I read a sentence, a paragraph, a page, or a chapter every single day. I call my sponsor and I talk to my sponsees every single day, and I try to do something nice for somebody. And what that looks like for me is I take time out of my day to improve somebody else's. You know, those are the 4 things that I do every single day. Those are my dailies that help me stay sober and connected to God today. My life today looks completely different. I just applied for graduation from Utah Valley University from the College of Engineering. I currently am on the honor roll with a 3.8 GPA, and I get a walk, and they're going to hand me a diploma on stage in April. You know, I bought my first home with my wife in January. And so we're going to spend our first Thanksgiving. We're going to have our family here for Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas, you know. Um, I've walked through some pretty tough stuff. Me and my wife, we got pregnant twice, and we lost our first baby November 2023 at 20 weeks. We were halfway there, and we lost our baby. And then again at 16 weeks, a few months later, we lost our second child. And then barely on Saturday, we gave birth to a beautiful baby named Simon, you know. And during these hard times, I have never thought about putting a needle in my arm. And I know that's because I'm contingent with my spiritual maintenance and my connection with God today. You know, my cup is full. And it's not because I focused on filling up my cup, right? It's really hard to fill up a cup when it has a hole in it. So what I focus on doing today is I put the order of operations in currently, and I say God, you, and then me. And if I focus on doing God's work and filling up everybody else's cup, when it overflows, I get some, you know? And that's how I live my life today. And I'm telling you guys, I have 3 healthy boys. I have a beautiful wife. I have a home. I have a career. I'm a land surveyor. I don't say any of this to be braggadocious. I make more money than I've ever made in my entire life, you know? And it's because I know that what I do for a living isn't what I do for money. What I do for a living is I try to carry this message to other alcoholics to help them achieve sobriety through God. What I do for money is completely separate, you know. As my sobriety's kind of evolved, now I've really focused on checking in with my employer. Step 11 has meant more to me now than it ever has before. Before step 11 meant to me was like I'd listen to a speaker tape in the car on the way to work, you know. I meditate, you know. And that's cool. If that's what you're doing, more power to you, you know. I think for me, I was trying to use that as an out. But today I make it a point to get on my knees in humility and talk out loud, you know. When I first got sober, I did a lot of foxhole prayers, you know. I didn't want anybody to see me or hear me because I felt goofy, or I felt, you know, I didn't want them to judge me, I guess. But today I hit my knees and I talk out loud, and then I roll over and I try to meditate and I focus on words like peace and service and love. And this has really helped my recovery. And then of course, you know, step 12, that's 90% of this program. It's really funny that I'm here today because the speaker tape he heard, somebody else was supposed to speak that day. And there's a huge rivalry out here, and it's Utah versus BYU. And I think the speaker didn't want to miss the game. So he's like, I'm sick, you know? So they're like, RJ, you need to do it. And I was like, fuck that, dude. I'm not doing that. I want to watch the game. And I immediately was like, dude, the only reason you have a TV to watch the game on is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Get your fucking ass to that meeting. So I went to that meeting and I spoke. And it's so funny because then I got your guys' call. And normally on a Wednesday, because it's 11:30 in the morning here on a Wednesday, I would be at work and I wouldn't be able to do this, right? But because I had a baby on Saturday, I have a whole week off of work to spend at home with the baby and my wife. And all of a sudden, the day that you guys had open was on Wednesday. And you tell me, is that a coincidence or is that God? You know, I don't overthink it today. I don't need to overthink it because I believe that it's God, you know? So the fact that I'm on this cool ass meeting, this is one of the coolest meetings I've ever been a part of. Like, I felt like I was about to walk into a UFC fight, you know, like they had pumped up music. I was like, shit, I'm walking out, you know, like I felt like it was my walkout music, you know, like it was pretty cool. I'm grateful to be here today, and I'm grateful that you guys are all part of my recovery today. And I can tell you right now that I won't get loaded today, and I won't feel the way I felt back then today. And I'm going to continue to do that one day at a time for the rest of my life. And I really appreciate you guys listening today. And so with that, I'll take another 24. Thanks, guys.
Wow, that was amazing. Do you guys want to come in and thank RJ for sharing?
Thank you.
Thank you, RJ.
So much.
Beautiful,
That was
man.
Yo,
amazing.
thank you, RJ.
Yeah.
RJ.
Thank you,
That was
RJ.
great.
Thank you, RJ.
Wow.
Thank you guys for listening.